well, but you don't truly fit. So he basically turned me down. And I left the office. And I'll never forget, I went back to the office. I knocked on the door, and he was like, what's going on? Do you forget anything? I was like, no, we're not finished here. I want this to be, the place where I truly learn from the great. And he was a little bit shocked and told me, can you start tomorrow? When people talk about plan B and plan C, I'll be honest with you, I dropped every plan B, C, D, E, F. It went down the drain in order for me to be absolutely focused on what I wanted to do. My sister actually did like full 12 years of conservatory and then even the musicology career. I was so interested, I will actually get her books and learn about music theory on my own and everything else. It went so deep that I really went for it. I think that in this industry and in this job, number one, you have to be passionate. You have to really recognize how passionate you are, and you have to persevere.
Hello, everybody. This is Ray Williams. I'm here with another edition of the IMSTA interview series on mixing engineers. Today, we're very, very happy and fortunate to have with us one of the most celebrated and awarded recording engineers around today, Mr. Rafa Sardina. Rafa, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me here with you, Ray. Really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Let's start at the beginning. You grew up in a city called Bermeo. Did I say that correctly?
Yes, that's correct, yes. I was born in a little town called Guernica, like the Picasso painting. Just coincidentally, I was born there, just to get this out of the way, because many people, have that thing. Where is he from, Bermeo or Guernica? Those small town, fights. But I really grew up in Bermeo. Bermeo is my hometown, yeah.
And that's a small fishing village on the north coast of Spain, sort of the northeastern half of the Spanish northern coast, right?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, very close to France, only like an hour away from France. Yeah.
And what do they do in that town? What's growing up in that town like?
Well, growing in that town was very interesting because it has one of the biggest fishing fleets in Spain and in Europe in general. It's just one of the biggest. And it's not only like the fisheries in that area, but a lot of the international fishing industry is based in these little towns in northern Spain. Like they are in some parts of Italy or some parts of Portugal. So there wasn't just like an internal view of things, but we will get a lot of outside influence. We'll get a lot of information from the outside world, just because all of these fishermen will go around the world and then return home for a few months and then go back out, for another 4 to 6 months and then return again. That was pretty much the dynamic of that lifestyle. And so we got a lot of influence, including music. I remember growing up and getting a lot of the UK influence in terms of music. The British music was so present in my upbringing. My cousins will bring it to me to the house. Even when I was only like 5 years old, I would be listening to absolutely everything.
Okay, it's fair to say that the industry of the town really helped internationalize the living experience there, even for a child like you.
Yeah, at least in some specific elements, like the kind of music we will actually consume. I remember, on the other hand, it's a small town. Let's not forget, it's a very small town. I think it's no more than 15,000 people and in this town. And being a small town, there wouldn't be like that many things to do. And if you had an area of interest, you would really dig into it. Like, for example, me and my cousin, Rufo Urbina, he's an amazing drummer on his own and has played with everybody. We were both like so interested in music. We were so mesmerized by not just the music itself, but by production. We'll devour like all of the credits of every album. We'll find out who produced, who engineered, who played on every single song, those type of things. So we had the time to really dig into all of this information. And that's how I started becoming more and more aware and more interested in that side of music making.
Let's talk about your first interaction with music. How did that come about? Like, how did you, as a young child, you're probably supposed to be out playing football, flying kites, hanging out with other kids. How is it that you're drawn to music?
Well, I think one of my biggest influences was a much older cousin of me who would actually bring vinyls to the house all the time. Every time he will get any new release, anything new, he'll just bring it to the house. That's how I, for example, listened to the Beatles for the first time. And I devoured those albums. Or I listened to, you name it, Thin Lizzy. I don't know, every single possible style of music that you can imagine. Then there was also the influence of the existing vinyl collection in the house from my parents, which was a more world music oriented type of collection. Artists from Greece, from Italy, from South America, even from the US, so it was really, the sum of all of these different elements. But the one thing that I can recognize right now is that music really had a big emotional impact on me, even early on. And I paid attention even to the lyrics, which most people didn't. I really paid attention to the lyrics.
Now, the lyrics, of course, were mostly in English. Were you bilingual?
They were in English, but they were also in Italian, and they were in other languages. But yes, mainly in English, right? English or Spanish. We actually did that exercise, and I think that it actually helped us become a little bit more, educated, because we will actually try to understand those lyrics. We'll try to know what they were actually saying, what they were talking about. So to me, it was, another learning alley, that came out of music. Trying to know what it was all about. Because the first thing that you detected was the raw emotion that the music transmits, right? But after you go past that, you want to know why. Why are they singing this way? Why are they performing this way? What's the message all about? Obviously, all of this also brings some disappointments once in a while, where you find out that the lyrics, didn't actually have that much much meaning in the big, that much depth in the big picture. But yeah.
Did you ever want to play an instrument? Did you have access to instruments as well as a youngster?
Oh yeah, I had access to instruments because my sister played the piano, so I fooled with the piano once in a while, and then she started playing guitar, and that's when I stole the guitar from her, and that became my instrument. And we'll fight over the guitar, even though she didn't want to play it. We'll fight over it because it was her guitar, and it was a very cheap, Spanish nylon guitar. And by the way, my family still has it. So, I just played like a few years back, like 3 years ago. I found it again. I was like, oh my God, the guitar is still here. But that became my instrument. And I will actually come out with songs by ear. And I didn't actually study music back then. My sister was, and she actually did like full 12 years of, conservatory, and then even the musicology career, college degree and all that. But I was so interested, I will actually get her books and learn about music theory on my own and everything else. It was that deep. That interest in me was so, it went so deep that I really went for it. And I would just, figure out songs by ear. And, that became my exercise into music. Yeah.
Now, were your parents into music as well? Because you said you had a piano at home. Did your mom, your dad play?
First, we didn't have a piano. In the later years, we did have a piano, but first we didn't have a piano. Couldn't afford a piano. But I will actually play wherever I will see a piano. Other places I will actually fool with the piano. I remember actually one summer I spent in San Diego, and the house had a piano. Coincidentally, it just had a piano. It was a rental, but it had an upright piano. And that summer, I figured out so many songs. It was sort of like my exercise. I was so interested things that interested me, basically. I'll just come out with the chords and the structure of the songs and play them. But yeah, my main instrument was the guitar, and anyhow, yeah.
So your sister had a lot of musical education. Did you have any formal training, or you just developed this musical ability by ear?
I did it by ear, but then I took music classes later on. No, I did actually, get some, got formed a little bit.
You learn to make music first, and then you learn about the music. That's yes. Actually not a bad way to do it, Rafa. The next thing you know, your parents moved to San Diego. How does that happen?
Yeah, they actually moved to America because they were between San Diego and Mexico, so they were back and forth between the two, and that actually allowed me as a teenager to be here in the States, have a different kind of experience, even musically speaking, and the same with Mexico. Whenever I would spend a few months in Mexico. Yeah, that was a completely different culture and experience per se. Even the music they would listen to, it was so different from what I was used to in Europe, because one of our biggest influences was the UK, musically speaking, and obviously the rest of Europe, but mainly the UK. It really dictated what was being listened to. Even though back on those years, the American wave in terms of what was being listened in Europe really affected us, right? It really was important. But that's why my taste became so eclectic, because I was exposed to so many different things early on. When I was just a teenager, I was listening to mariachi, or I was listening to, even at a party, just being exposed to a mariachi in a party, to a real mariachi ensemble, really affects you. You go like, damn, what's this? It's such a phenomenal, style of music, and the musicianship, and those are the little things that really shocked me in terms of my formation. And obviously, I was also so exposed to classical music through my sister, who had to study so much of the classical repertoire. So that also helped me understand the depth of classical music, because some people say like, oh, classical music is, they categorize it as a very narrow style or type of music. Is the most diverse type of music, period. More than anything imaginable. To me, it covers, it encompasses every style of music that could be possibly done, even other than punk music, right? Where you have like this factor of lack of, different type of performance. But other than that, it really encompasses everything.
But after this, you wind up back in Spain in medical school. How does this happen? You're like 16 years old?
Yeah, I was 16, 17. And obviously like any kid, had to think about my future. And I was convinced, I had to do something with music. That was always with me. That never left me. But I had to choose something, at least start some kind of career. And I didn't want to do anything having to do with business or economics or that side of things. And I was really mesmerized by science too. And medical school actually was a good fit for me. So yeah, I went to medical school and actually did very well. I was doing very, very well in medical school. But music never left me. Every single second of my day that I wouldn't be studying, I would be dedicating it to music, to reading magazines, playing music, going to concerts, learning about engineering, because that really became an interest of mine too, how to manipulate music. And I'll be hanging with friends who have like sound systems, and I even did the sound for boxing matches. Anything imaginable, I've done, basically. Not just music per se, but the sound for a, boxing match. Things like that. And it was quite a learning experience. And after a number of years in medical school, one day I realized your heart is not here, really. Your heart is with music. It's in music. I mean, that's what you must do. And I basically quit. I quit the career because I realized it was going to be the only way to achieve my dreams.
Of course, this cannot go over well with your parents. What do your parents do when they find out that you dropped out of medical school? What happened?
They were shocked. Well, or I will say they were surprised that I did that kind of move, but they were not shocked. They were not shocked because they knew already I was spending every single minute of my life with something related to music. Either in the technical side or on the creative side, I was already doing that. I was, always dreaming about getting, my dream guitar, or getting this new pedal, or, or building these new speakers, for my system or for somebody else's system. So I really dig into everything, every single aspect, even the technical aspect and mechanical aspect of building, cabinet boxes and retrofitting speakers and crossovers and doing that kind of stuff. I was full on into it.
Now, as a teenager, this is not the typical profile. Most teenagers are playing video games, they're hanging out, they're going to the beach, they're going to clubs. So do you have a social network? Do you have friends that are doing that? Are you doing any of that? What's the late teens Rafa Sardina like?
I was a social butterfly, I have to admit. I was a social butterfly. But music is actually the best conduit to socialize. In reality, I will be hanging with different bands, going to their own rehearsals, not even mine, but to their rehearsals, helping with the sound, then hanging out at night, going for a drink. So my life actually, I have to say, during those years became quite complicated because my days needed more hours. My days need to be longer. Seriously, I was thinking like, damn, I need an extra 8 hours because I had to study too. I had to study for medical school. So it really became, thinking about those years, they were a bit stressful because of that. Because I was really trying to pursue my real interest. I still had to, go through medical school and be good with it. I'm a very responsible person, so I need to have A's on everything. I really needed to be on with my career. So that's why I quit, basically. That's why I realized, and I remember exactly the day and the moment where I decided to quit. I was working by the marina in this little town right next to Bilbao, and I went like, this is it. I'm doing it. There is no way I can move forward. I was already an intern in a hospital, endocrinology plant, doing my, internship, in medical school. And I was like, there's no way I can do this and this and this and still go to the hospital. And it was like, damn.
Now, I got to get into your head a little bit. I mean, because if you became a doctor, you'll make a lot of money. It's almost guaranteed income. If you're going to go into music, you're not guaranteed any income. In fact, it might be a very different kind of financial experience, right? Did you have any fear? Did you worry about money at that point? Because you're almost giving up a golden loaf of bread for maybe scraps. So what's going on in your head as far as a calculation with respect to money?
I never did worry about it. I mean, my pursuit for my dream was so big that I always thought, I'm going to manage. Somehow I'm going to manage. I will even think, I'm going to find a second job so I can still work doing music. So that's how, that's how important it was for me. That's how intense, the whole emotional aspect of it was. I really needed to dedicate my life to that, and then I will do whatever will be necessary to make ends meet. That was my thinking. That was always my thinking. So when people talk about plan B and plan C, I'll be honest with you, I dropped every plan B, C, D, E, F. It went down the drain in order for me to be absolutely focused on what I wanted to do. Keep in mind also, when I was only like 16, I had my first recording studio experience where I was part of a full album recording. It really affected me. It really transformed me. I still have pictures from those sessions. I was like, oh my God. It was another huge window to creativity. Knowing that you work out the sounds in a different way. It was like, oh my God, there's like this other aspect to making music other than being in a rehearsal room and working out the songs. That was one thing. But then going to the studio and using all of these other tools, microphones, tape machine, all of this to work towards your creativity. I mean, that really blew my head. That was like, oh my God, this is it. So that's why, I was thinking about music, but I saw like a more diverse range of possibilities in the music making process. It wasn't just about the songwriting or the arrangement of the songs. It was more than that to me. It was like, wow. And then you get into the studio and then you work this out and you get sounds, and then you can actually make sounds. You can create new things that don't actually exist. That's what really transformed me. And
it was at that point that you decided you want to do engineering.
I wasn't clear I was going to do engineering exclusively, but it became a possibility. I knew about it. Up to that point, I didn't know about it. I like to fool with things and, build things, but I didn't truly know what being a recording engineer was. And forget about me being a mix engineer. I had no concept at the very beginning. I thought it was, okay, you record this way and it's like a picture and that's what you get, right? Then you just refine it slightly and that's it, without really knowing how much you can do through mixing or how deep you can go as a producer into transforming things, or maybe not. So those roles were not fully understood by me, but I knew they existed. And I started exploring what they meant. And I remember I subscribed to every possible magazine I could. I subscribed even back then, early on, to Mix Magazine. I will get it by mail like 4 months late or 6 months late, but I'll get it, I'll read it, I'll dissect every paragraph of that magazine and take notes. It went like that. It went that far, okay? I think I still have some of those magazines, like every single page has songwriting or some notes in them, because I was trying to understand without any formal training. I had zero formal training in production or engineering. I didn't know shit. I still don't know shit, but I was just trying to understand.
Now, so how did you prepare yourself for the engineering field? What did you do next?
I just mentioned one of the things that I did. I tried to get every possible magazine that talk about it. I bought a couple of books. The Miles Hubbard, basic recording, every possible modern recording techniques. Every possible thing I could get my hands on, or my friends could get their hands on, I would just borrow, and I would just even make photocopies. And yeah, I was on a mission. I really was on a mission. So that's how I started preparing. And
then you decided to go to school. Tell me about that experience.
Yeah, and I remember I didn't have the means to go to a full program. I was like thinking, how do I even know where I should go? So I started inquiring about schools that had not like a college degree 3 or 4 years, but much, shorter, something that could be more attainable for me. But I need to do my first incursion into it, my first test. And I remember I found like this little school in Ohio. And that's the only thing I could afford back in the day, because it was just like a very, very short program, like 3 or 4 weeks. I'm talking like a very short, intensive program. It's called the Recording Workshop in Chillicothe, Ohio. And I remember I signed for that. And I just, same as I was describing before with the magazines and everything else, I just put like full dedication into it. And And that really opened my eyes, because for the first time, somebody was able to explain to me what the possibilities were. You know, what being a recording engineer meant on so many different styles of music, so many different styles of engineering. I understood what the different roles and the hierarchy in a production were. Why did the producer exist, and the different types of producers you could encounter, and what being an arranger or an orchestrator, or every single role. And that really helped me understand and define what was going to be my next step. And I decided to really start by becoming the best possible recording engineer I could be. And that's when I started working doing live sound, which I had been doing before non-stop, but now truly professionally, I was touring non-stop 24/7. That was my life. Touring, doing as a front house engineer, monitor engineer, stage manager, tour manager, production manager. I did it all. And not really to learn those positions, because one thing I understood early on is that I wanted to work in the studio. Live sound really was a thrill, but I understood that death of creativity only happened in a recording studio.
You also went to Full Sail in Orlando. How was that experience?
Yes, and that's why I worked. That's why I started working. I needed to save in order to make it to Full Sail. I really, of all of the schools that I check into, they seem to me like the one that offered the biggest, back in the day, the biggest range of practical, of real, classes with the gear in the studio and all of that. Because keep in mind, I was pretty good at absorbing the information, like in terms of reading it and understanding it and whatnot. I had an engineer side of me in my head. I went through medical school, so I knew about chemistry and biology. I mean, so many things. But so that part was relatively easy for me to understand. But I needed to get more real experience in real situations with musicians. So that's why I decided to go with them, because they offer that back in the day. And not that many schools offer that back then. Now there are many options, but back then there were not that many.
You finished Full Sail, and what do you do next? You moved to LA, right?
I finished Full Sail, and I remember they offered me to get placement, because I was eligible to do an internship, right? And the school was going to help me do an internship. They offered me to do it back in Spain, because obviously they assume by being a Spaniard, even though I have a foot in America already, because my parents live here, they assumed that I would want to go back, which wasn't really the truth. So I explained that to them, and I made my list of the places I would love to go to. And I'll never forget that in the top of my list was Oceanway Recording in Hollywood. Just because I would read so much in magazines constantly, my favorite bands would be doing live sessions at Oceanway. And it could be anything from the Black Crowes to, any band you could imagine. And even all of the classics were recorded there, from, Pet Sounds, from the Beach Boys to, you name it. So I made my list of studios, but that one was at the top of my list. And the school actually came back to me, because they found me an internship, and it was with Herbie Hancock in his home studio in LA. And I turned it down. Actually, I told Herbie like 2 years ago. We met, and I told him that I turned down his internship, but only because I already had my dream. I had already decided on what my dream location would be, and I wanted to be exposed to as much diversity as possible in terms of music. I wanted to be, also we was doing orchestral dates, they were doing the classics, they were doing lots of rock, they were doing pop, they were, all of the Michael Jackson albums were being produced at Record One Studios, which was part of Oceanway. It was like Quincy was there all the time. I was like, I need to get to this place. So that's how I, truly decided on where I needed to be.
Now, so you get to Ocean Way, but you got to be the lowest person on the totem pole there, right? What do they have you doing at the beginning?
Well, actually, I have an anecdote. When I got to, I came to LA only for 24 hours, and I did 3 interviews in 3 studios. And the last one I did was at Ocean Way. And I will never forget the interview, because he was with Jack Wards, who was the general manager, the GM at the studios. And Alan Size was walking around, so I met him briefly, but we didn't talk much. And yeah, we had the interview, and I was so dedicated. I knew how to use the synclavier. I was like a know-it-all kind of guy, right? I knew how to use any synchronizer imaginable, the links and this one and the other one, and I was like really deep into it. And I explained, my abilities, and I'll never forget, he told me, I don't really care what you know. The reality here is that what we really value is experience. So I tried to explain my experience, and I had already recorded albums. Keep in mind, I had already done albums, tours. I did have a wealth of experience, but to them, obviously, it was a very low profile experience compared to what they were used to. And he basically turned me down. Jack, by the end of the interview, he mentioned that he really liked me, that I seemed to be like so dedicated, but I didn't fit the profile of what they were looking for, because they only hire either assistants who had to be really, really experienced, or they hire runners. And I made it clear early on, like, well, runner, yes, I'm up for doing anything, but obviously I have so much more experience. And in a way, I think that turned out to be like a bad thing to have, that much experience, because they were thinking like, well, but you don't truly fit. So he basically turned me down, and I left the office. And I'll never forget, I knocked back into the office. I went back to the office. I knocked on the door, and he was like, what's going on? Do you forget anything? And I was like, no, we're not finished here. I really need to explain something to you. And I told him, this is the place. I want this to be my school. I want this to be, the place where I truly learn from the great. I can't go anywhere else. This is the place. And he was a little bit shocked and told me, can you start tomorrow? And I was like, what? And I couldn't, actually, because I came to LA only for 24 hours. I had to go back to Florida. So I was like, I can't, but I can be back in 2 months. And I remember he said, like, well, I don't have a job description for you, but you're going to have to do whatever it takes. You're going to be an intern. I was probably like the first intern they ever took. Like that, like a real intern that had an aspiration to become an engineer, because I think they had some of the interns, but just for, other kind of duties, just as a job, to take care of the facility and all that. So that's what I did. And that's how I got my foot in the door at Ocean Way.
Wow. That is an amazing story. Now, Rafa, you're in Ocean Way. You actually got in there. What happened? What do you do? So
I was doing a little bit of everything. I was very privileged because they allowed me to be in setups, which was the first step into becoming an assistant. So you understood, what was that? And they actually gave you they will give you, the vote of confidence, like, okay, you could actually handle everything in a setup, the microphones, everything. So that was the first step. But I was also a runner. I would do everything imaginable, anything that was needed, absolutely everything that was needed. And it wasn't really a problem for me, because when I did live sound over the years, that's what you do. You're a jack of all trades. You do whatever it takes, even if it's clean the stage. You do whatever it takes in order to, to make the show happen. So yeah, that was my attitude. And early on, I was part of sessions as a third. They put me in the Academy Awards, pre-recordings as a third engineer, not the second engineer, not the main assistant, but I was a third. So I had I was very privileged to be part of those sessions, and they put me in, so many different sessions, with David Foster, Tom Petty, with Don Was, with Red Hot Chili Peppers. I mean, you name it. Like, I acquired a lot of experience by being in those sessions right on. So it was still a long road, and I had to prove to everybody that I was worthy of becoming one of the main assistants, and I eventually did. And from that point on, it was just a matter of time till clients actually started hiring me outside the studio for other projects. They would start calling me, "Are you available? Can we do this session? Are you?" And they knew I was game, and they knew I had the abilities. So that's how the transition happened into becoming a freelance engineer.
Did you develop a sort of your own style of engineering? Did you have any things that you did that were perhaps a little different? Certain experiences that you brought to engineering that you thought were unique, that the clients valued?
I think so, because I learned from every possible engineer and producer. From Glyn Johns, from Andy Jones, from George Massenberg, from Phil Ramone. I was very privileged. I work under the wing of all of these great, great producers and engineers. Peter Asser, Alan Seitz himself. So I was exposed to that every single day of my life at Oceanway. Work with Michael Jackson, with Quincy, Bruce Sweden, you name it. So I think that what you bring to the table is that unique knowledge from different styles of production, engineering, and whatnot. And other clients want to benefit from your wide range of knowledge. That's what truly happens. They want to really, know if you can do some specific techniques, for example, that Jack Joseph Puig will be using. And you knew them already. You had been not just watching, but helping, on those sessions. So yeah, that's what the client really values, And obviously, you have to kick ass. Otherwise, they don't call you back, right? So it was also a matter of being like super proficient and fast and very determined about what you were doing. Being like very, very determined. And yeah, that reassurance to the client is super important. And the delivery.
You are from Spain. You moved to the United States, mid-teens. You're obsessed with music. And you're in a room with Michael Jackson and Quincy Jones. What is that feeling like for you? What were you thinking? What did you do when you went home at night and you lie in your bed and you start thinking about what just happened? Explain to us the feeling that you had when you were seeing these people in close proximity. These are people that you knew for many, many years, I'm assuming. Explain that for us.
Well, I think that there were mixed emotions, right? First, one of the first one that you feel is fear and insecurity, right? Because you are like, damn, this is it. I can't fail. These are my heroes. These are the people I look up to. And all of a sudden, you are in the same room and you are performing some duties where you are part of the team and you have to deliver. And not only that, you have to do it in a way that's empathetic and that is normal, feels normal. You cannot be a fan in the studio, number one, right? That's a very basic rule. But you have to really outperform everybody else in a way. There's that competitiveness in terms of, okay, otherwise you are nothing. What's the meaning of you being in the room if you are not special in some kind of way? Special for the team, if they don't really value you as, bringing something to the table. That was always one of the main things I'll always be thinking. How do I bring something to the table? And that's something I always tell my assistants when they start with me or interns. What do you bring to the table? Why should I have you instead of the other guy? There are millions of people who love to be here or in a recording studio. Why should they hire you? Why are you so special? And I think that being special is not about the technical side of things. Being special has to do with how you use your empathy, how you communicate, how do you make people feel at ease, how do you help them be better, how do you create that cloud of reassurance to the client, to the artist, to the engineer, to the producer, to the arranger, to the orchestrator, to the assistant. I mean, everybody. And knowing the hierarchy too. Knowing that when you are in a session and you are the assistant, you have to make the engineer look like $1 million bucks. And nobody else needs to know. Okay? You have to make them look like a superhero. And the same with the producer. And nobody else needs to know. The same with the artist. Have that, you be very complicit with the artist, because the artists are the most insecure animal in the studio. Those are the ones that go through the biggest fear when they are in a session and they are in the thick of it. The artists, and with the artists I include the musicians, because anybody who has to perform and has to create in front of other people is so exposed. They're so vulnerable.
What do you think in your life prepared you to have this kind of skill, this level of empathy, to be successful in that very, very charged environment?
Two things, and they're like super clear to me. Medical school, being in a plant with 300 sick people, some of them are gonna die, period. You are in the endocrinology plant, that a big percentage, are gonna die. Everybody, you got people dying every day. You develop a different way of communication. You know what's important to the other person, not what's just important to you. You have to think about what's important to them, or what's needed by them in that very moment. Same thing happens in a session. You might think like, oh, what's important is that we recorded like super clean and this like that. Maybe that's not what's important. You have to dig deeper and learn what's the most important element in this very moment. Maybe that the artist, proves a point to the producer, and that's the biggest mission he has in this very moment, regardless of anything else, even regardless of capturing a good recording. You have to really understand people. And to me, going through medical school really prepared me, without me knowing, but it really prepared me for that. And the other thing was working on live sound. On live sound, you only have one chance to make things good. One. And then the moment is gone. It's freaking gone. It's the past. You are done. Now, you cannot, zero excuses. You cannot go like, yeah, but if I could, no, forget about it. Don't even tell me. It's gone. The moment is gone. That kind of training really helped in the studio also, because it always allowed me to think ahead and think like, oh shit, if this happens and we don't have that extra track, oh, we're going to be in trouble. I better come up with plan B with an extra microphone doing this, and then we actually free these two extra tracks in the 24-track machine, and let's just try time code on another tape on the second machine, just in case, because this is about to go south. We're running. The producer is not going to know how to get out of this one. So you actually help the producer without him knowing. You start doing things in the background that are helping the producer or the engineer in charge. So that's what you do, even as an assistant. And when you become the engineer, the same thing applies. You are always protecting the artist and the producer and everybody else in the team, even the arranger. If you have a note or something that you fear is not going to work, you let the arranger know. You don't do it out in the open, letting everybody know. You tell you should check, measure 89 through 120. That passage, are you sure? Because this might happen. You explain to him, this might happen. Oh, yeah. Let's split. Let's do a divisi of this part of the violas. So you become a collaborator. I think that's the main word, how you will describe it. You become a collaborator, but not just with the artist. You become a collaborator with everything. I think that's sort of like the training you should do in your head, in your mind, all the time. How do I become a better collaborator with everything, with everybody I'm working with? How can I be of service to the music and to the project? So, and I was very privileged that I had that in my head early on. And that came through the live sound training, through touring. Always thinking ahead.
So you have all these skills. The only question I really have is, how do you still do that when you're having a bad day, Rafa? You must have bad days like everybody else. What do you do when you're not 100%? You got other things weighing you down. How do you manage?
I'll be honest with you. When I have a bad day, the best thing that can happen to me is that I go into the studio and I work on music. It actually allows me to pull out of my bad days. It's like when people say like, wow, how do you manage to work every day or get inspired, right? That's always the big question everybody asks me. How do you get inspired like every single day? It's impossible. And I go like, no, it's not. I mean, you get to work and the work itself, like getting into it and going through those emotions and going through, how the process, going through the process allows you to actually become inspired. That's what actually inspires you. And so that's part of my secret, if you can call it a secret, but that's kind of like my process. I really go into it and then sure, I know I'm going to get somehow inspired and I'm going to pull out of any other that I had in my head, right? Because all of us, we all have like personal lives and problems and things that, happen in your life. And of course, like anybody else, I go through all of that. But yeah, coming into the studio and getting into a session and actually even dealing with people allows you to pull out of your problems. So in a way, I would say that music is, and working in music is sort of like a therapy to me. And I have always taken it that way. I have been very honest about the process, and I can have like a really, truly bad day before I go in the studio, but then I know it's actually, the studio is going to soothe me somehow, and the process is going to soothe me, and I'm gonna be good. And then maybe when I finish the day, my problems are going to come back to me. But at least, I'm going to have some kind of therapy throughout the day.
So you leave Ocean Way 2001. You become an independent engineer in LA. What's that transition like? Again, you didn't have fear leaving medical school, but is there a little bit of fear? Are you leaving the safety and security of Ocean Way and you're going out on your own? Explain that transition for us.
Actually, I left Ocean Way much earlier than that. I left Ocean Way, I was already doing like big sessions, freelancing from 95 on. I was already doing like really big sessions. Actually, I did some of my biggest early sessions as an independent engineer in 96. Some like really, really big ones. And I traveled, the world, like New York, London, I work everywhere. Miami, Seattle, you name it. And it was a process. It happened slowly. I have to admit, I was very lucky. I was very lucky because I met good people along the way. I met good co-conspirators, to my career, right? I met people like one of them. There were several of them, but one of them was actually Kamara Kambon, a truly amazing, talented, producer, musician, and he actually had a lot of faith in me, and he really trusted I could help his productions. And I started working with him, and I did all kinds of things with him. I work on movies, I work on documentaries, I work on TV shows, and eventually that led me to working with Dr. Dre, because he was his MD also. Later on, he became his MD, and he co-wrote many of those songs, with Dre and many other artists, Mary J. Blige, and you name it. So I started working in that circle. with him, and we work on so many productions over the years. But that allowed me to also work on other styles of music I had not worked on before. Like I work on, hip hop and R&B. I mean, so many other things. I work on a lot of movies with him. We worked together on so many movies. He was one of them, but I was lucky enough to find these people along the way. People who really trust my abilities, and they really consider me to be an accomplice to their work. Not just a work for hire, but I was truly an accomplice to what they were creating, to their creations.
Okay, so let's talk about luck. Now, had you left Full Sail and went back to Spain, you may not have been so lucky. Had you turned around and left at Ocean Way when they told you no first and not go back, you may not have been so lucky. How much of your luck is just your fierce determination and your personality and all the things that prepared you for this life? How much of it is really just sort of the internal combustion of Rafa Sardina?
I think it has a lot to do with that, because if you just trust pure luck, very often you start something and you don't finish it. In terms of you don't go all the way. Fear actually gets hold of you, and your insecurity gets hold of you, and you don't end up doing what you feel is the right thing to do. And for example, in those situations, I'll feel, no, this is the right thing to do. This is what I need to do. This is where I need to be. So I was very, not just persistent, but I was very clear-minded, and I tried to project that clarity to the other person. This is what we truly need to do. Help me, be here, and I'm gonna be with you 1,000%. So I think that luck is always, or it is very often misinterpreted by people when they talk about luck and say like, oh, how lucky such and such person was. Very often is that internal combustion as you describe it. It's not luck, because it's in every cell of your body. It's in the way you look at that person and are able to communicate, I'm here to do this. Let's do it. I'm the right person.
Tell me about setting up after hours, your home studio. Why did you want to do that? And why do you want to work at home? There's always talk about this work-life balance, and explain to us that whole process.
Actually, do recording sessions wherever was necessary. For example, with Camara Cambon, we will be working on a lower budget type of movie or documentary, and we'll have to record the acoustic guitars or the pianos in a house, just in an apartment or in a house. So I had a few things. I had a couple of microphones and had a couple of preamps, a compressor, things that allow me to work in other places. Next thing you know is that I have a small Pro Tools rig. And then that allowed me over the years to build my first home studio, which was like very, very, very small, very minimalistic. And from that point on, it kept growing and growing, and it allowed me to do my own productions on my own. Bands or artists I really believe in, but didn't have the resources. So that was my thinking, to have that sort of freedom to do whatever I felt was necessary to do, creatively speaking. And that's why I built my first home studios. And then later on, one of the main reasons why I built like a truly like full-blown recording studio was to be more at home. Because keep in mind, working in Hollywood every day with traffic and whatnot, you spend like a good 2 to 3 hours in traffic every single day. You don't see your family that often. You cannot take breaks in the middle of the day and see your family. I became a dad. To me, that changed the whole equation. Prior to becoming a dad, I spent 5 months recording at Criteria Studios in Miami. 2 of those, I was able to bring my family to Miami with me, but the rest I couldn't. So I will only see them like every other week. And I was determined to build my home studio. so that when I would come home, I could do more of the mixing, especially in my studio.
I've actually been to your studio, the first incarnation of it, and you have an SSL Duality in there. Not too many home studios have an SSL Duality. How many channels was that, and how did you get it in there?
I have a 48 channel, like a full-blown SSL, and it actually comes in two pieces, half and half, and sideways, through the door. So it's actually quite manageable. It's very tight, but yeah. Actually, the alley in the entrance, with my neighbors, that was the biggest challenge because we didn't have enough room to turn the console, so we had to push the fence, and it was quite a process. But when I built the studio, I started with a smaller console, and then I turned into the Duality. I really wanted to do any kind of work in my studio. I didn't want any client to go like, yeah, but I would like to do it in a more professional kind of environment, or I wanted to do it this way or not. I didn't want any of my clients to find any excuses about coming to my studio. So, it really worked because it really showed them that I was building something truly professional. No expenses was spared in terms of what I would have available for them. Even for overdubs, I have a huge microphone collection, and it was always about that, about offering them the ultimate experience, not just something to get by, but the ultimate experience. You want to send into an M49? Okay, I got it. Into a C12, U47, I got it. So, yeah, I had that mindset in terms of what my studio would be.
Your studio has a lot of gear, Rafa. I mean, it's just packed. I even saw an EMT 250 and a 251 in there. Tell us about why do you need that when you have so many beautiful plugins, so many wonderful digital reverbs?
The reason why I have them is because when I acquired them, there were not actually that many plugins that could come even close to that. Now, obviously, we have such wealth of amazing plugins, but when I acquired them, that was the main reason. And then over the years, I kept them because they still do something special. Now there are more plugins that are adding the distortion and noise that is inherent to the A to D and D to A processes in the front end of the units and whatnot. But back then, many of the plugins were only capturing the algorithms per se, were capturing the main core of the sound, but not truly all of the variables or how they can affect in different settings. So that's why I kept them, but they are still wonderful units that work amazingly well in the analog world. The EMT250 is the first ever digital reverb, but you can only run it in analog mode, so analog in, analog out. So some of those I still use with my SSL. So they're actually in two channels of the SSL, so I use them in the analog world.
You also have a lot of very esoteric and unique gear. I remember seeing something from Abbey Road in your studio. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, one of the main pieces I have from Abbey Road is one of the very few TG consoles they did for, they call them transfer consoles. They have a bunch of the limiters, the limiter compressors, they have the EQs, they have the brilliance channels, and many other things. And yeah, it has a very unique sound. Actually, it's part of my drum sound. I use the Abbey Road EMI console for a lot of my elements of my drum sound. Even my parallel compression, very often, not always, but very often, is the EMI. And I also have some of the early filters underneath the TG. I have some of the filters that were from the earlier era, from the red era, from the tube console era. And then I also have on top of my rack, right in the center of the rack, what's called the Beatles EQ, is the EMI 920, which is an EQ they use that actually George Martin used, from what I heard, to EQ the final mix, to do a final, final curving to the final mix. And that's why they call it the Beatles EQ. They made very, very few of those units. So I have been very privileged to find these pieces over the years. They are collectibles, but more than that, they are exceptional. They actually sound great. They sound amazing, actually. So that's why I still keep them. Not to say that they are not wonderful plugins that I could be using, and I do use to emulate some of those processes, but I'm fortunate enough that I have some of the originals and I keep using them, especially if I have to use them in the analog side of things, in the analog side of my SSL. If I'm running parts of my mix through analog processes, I can always insert them on those.
Talk to us about microphones. And, for a lot of people watching this, they have a very modest home studio. They might have one or two microphones. Somebody like you have more than one or two microphones. When you're recording, what does having all these microphones actually mean? Why does anybody need, 20, 25 microphones? Isn't a microphone just a microphone?
They are not just microphones. They actually transmit emotions very differently. They actually are mood shapers. They shape the mood of any recording. For example, you put a specific microphone in a nylon guitar, and it might sound mellow. It might make it sound mellow. So it actually projects a very specific emotion to you. They really shape the emotion of the recordings. So that's why I use a lot of microphone techniques and a lot of microphones, when I'm recording. It's the main basic element of my recording skills has to do with choosing microphones, choosing preamps, and why. And positioning. It's super, super important. Same guitar, if I use a different type of microphone, might actually pull a lot of the brightness and the brilliance of the guitar, and that again projects a different kind of emotion. So to me, is the most essential element of recording. Being a good recording engineer goes through being really, really good with your microphones, knowing them very, very well, knowing from your database of experiences, knowing what the microphones can do for you and for the instrument and for the musician.
Now, you've recorded orchestras many times. Your experience there is vast. It started, of course, with your own family, your sister being into classical music. And going back to this microphones, when you're recording a session, we have a big orchestra in a room. What do you do about this bleed, which, obviously it's going to bleed into all the different microphones? How do you as a recording engineer manage this?
Bleed is your friend in terms of the overall sound that you are trying to achieve. The same with a big band. You are recording a big band. You have to turn bleed into your friend, not your enemy. And when you try to overcorrect by lack of experience, that's when you actually get in trouble. You get into a lot of trouble because you start making things sound unnatural. There are some basic rules of engineering that you must know in terms of the distance between one microphone and the instrument and the other microphone that's actually miking the instrument next to it. There are some basic elements that you have to master, but other than that, you need to have a sense of the big picture. You have to know, you have to go through the experience of doing it over and over again to recognize what's good and what's bad. And usually most bleed in this kind of situations is okay bleed, it's good bleed. It's not your enemy, as I mentioned before. So I was very privileged because while I was working at Oceanway, again, I was exposed to a lot of those type of sessions, big bands, big ensembles, like every other day. We'll be recording those type of projects like every other day. With Raikou, there are 14 musicians on the floor, all together in the same room, only using gobos to create some sort of isolation or direct sound, blockage between instruments. But no more than that. You had to know how one thing can blend with the other in the big picture. When we're talking about big ensembles, though, you also have to recognize what element can endanger the whole session. like one element that can be a question mark in terms of the recording. Is this element going to survive the final test? You know, the take might be amazing, but there is one or two elements that are going to have to be replaced. How is the bleed going to play into that? Is that going to be an issue? So those are the kind of things that you start learning about recording big ensembles. And that's when you start, especially even for movies. For movies, you know, you evaluate what could endanger the recording. Maybe the producer or the director is not sure about some element, isolate it. Or do an overdub with that element. He's not sure about the thickness of the orchestra, split the division of some of the elements. So you record those on a separate pass. Things that you start learning and you start suggesting even to the composer. If the composer doesn't have enough experience, you suggest those kind of things. So he or she doesn't get into trouble later on with the director, because you go all the way down to the mixing stage and they might want a different option and you cannot provide that option because of the bleed. So that's it. Yeah, but in general terms, for me, bleed is good. Bleed is not the enemy.
Now, in that kind of a session with an orchestral ensemble, how important is it to be able to read music?
I think it's very, very important, because you have to move fast and you have to be able to tell even the conductor or the composer what you hear. You're collaborating, as we mentioned earlier on. You also have to become a collaborator with the music. And every time we're doing a pass, I have every measure written down in every pass, you know, in my notes, right, you know, measure 25 violas, measure. Maybe they are not super specific notes in terms of, you know, what's wrong with it. That's because you cannot actually do all that work as you are engineering at the same time, you know. But at least you pass those notes even before the pass ends. You are already delivering those notes to the composer, so he goes like, okay, yeah, I knew about that one, I knew that. Oh, what do you hear that? Could you play it back? And you only spend like 2 seconds playing it back, and you're like, oh, we have to change this note in the cello. So you are their ally, so you have to make sure, you know, everything goes smooth, and it's instrumental. You can at least follow a chart, a music chart. You cannot just not do it.
What happens, Rafa, when you make a mistake in one of these sessions? I'm not talking about somebody else makes a mistake. I'm talking about you making a mistake. What happens?
You have to be honest. People really appreciate that. People truly appreciate that. You are more likely going to spend by a factor of 5, you know, the time to fix it, and you're still not going to be successful, versus being honest and asking, my bad, we need to take it from bar 8 to 12 one more time. You know, something happened. And you don't have to be super specific. You know, something technical happened. It was my mistake. Let's do it one more time. And people really appreciate that, and they respect it. The worst thing that can happen to you as an engineer is to keep hiding things till it really blows in your face. And it's eventually going to happen. At some point, you are going to have to explain it. You are going to have to even fix it, and you might not be able to fix it. And I've gone through that, even technical difficulties that happen under your watch, but were not truly your mistake. But you are ultimately responsible, because you are supposedly the ears for that session, and you don't find out even the same date. You find out about it like the following date, and you're like, shoot, you know, like, I didn't hear this. Something happened here. And then you see if there is any way to fix it on your end. And if not, I mean, you tell the team, you know, this happened. Let's fix it somehow. Or what's it going to mean? You know, like, you find a solution. You usually find a solution. But I think that honesty takes you a long, long way. Takes you a long, long way.
Have you ever done any online collaboration where you're recording somebody who's not in the physical area maybe in another country? Have you ever done any of that?
Oh, I've done that from the very, very beginning. Especially orchestras and many other types of overdubs. But yeah, we have truly been doing it for 15 years, if not more. We have been doing it for a long time. It's just that now the pandemic really forced everybody to get to it, and learn how to do it. So when the pandemic happened, I already had like some really, really developed techniques in terms of especially communication. How do you communicate with your people? And actually I did a small seminar about it for the Grammys at some point with John Beasley, because we wanted to go through the whole process. Checking all of the what ifs. What if, this fails? What if, you cannot communicate with the conductor and he's running the session and he's in London and you are here in LA? What happens? So there are many things that you have to take into account. You have to prioritize the hierarchy. Who makes the decisions? If I'm the producer here and I don't have ears on the session because the connection fails, I need to have a hierarchy of people I trust. And it might be the local producer over there, or it might be the conductor who I really trust. Depends on the music. Secondly, you need to have priorities in terms of what can be managed without my personal attention, what can be managed more easily, and what not. What kind of pieces of music I need to be part of, regardless, or they don't get recorded, because I have my saying on them. I really need to be part of that recording. I need to produce those parts. So you go through all of those elements, how you create, different connections with the different people in a session. You might be on a direct chat with the conductor and the local producer, the composer, and the arranger. And we're all in the same, connection, and the conductor has an iPad in front of him. So every time he's finishing a take, he already has all of the notes. 8 notes pop up, like measured 89 through 92. Let's change the violas, that C to C sharp. All of the specific notes pop up. So the conductor, who already has his own notes in his head, because he's obviously conducting, but also taking mental notes about what doesn't work in that piece of music, he evaluates those notes too, and everything goes super fast. We don't have to stop to explain to him, check this out in this measure. You don't even spend 5 seconds doing it. And if he has any question, he will voice it to you over the microphones. He will just say, okay guys, I don't agree with the change of the note of the cello and bar to 89 through 92. It's something else. I think it's the French horns, and let's check that out. Could you check your charts? And while he's rehearsing something else or making other changes with the orchestra. So it's all about that dynamic, making it fast, dynamic, and avoiding confusion all the time, avoiding confusion. When you create confusion in a session and everybody is talking over everybody and things are not structured in the most minimalistic kind of way, you waste so much time. Even the orchestra gets bored, gets like confused, like, okay, what's going on? That's wrong, or this, you're giving us, wrong notes, or this note contradicts the other note. What's going on? So that's what we try to avoid. And then you have another line of communication with the control room, where you usually have the local producer and the engineer. And you have a different kind of conversation with them. So you have several conversations happening simultaneously as a producer. So that's usually how it happens. And if I'm a collaborator, close collaborator with the composer, I might have another line of communication just with the composer, because we have our own personal notes that have to do with the performance of the other people involved, even the performance of the conductor. We might not be liking something he's doing. We're not going to tell him to his face. We have to first discuss it and then see how we voice it and send it to him. So, but only because I've been doing it for so long, it was super easy to do it now with the pandemic. Plus now during the pandemic, a lot of new technology came around, and cheaper technology where you don't have to spend thousands of dollars on a subscription to be able to do it.
A lot of young people watching this, want to become assistants, want to get into the business, want to become interns. What's your advice? How do you prepare? I mean, obviously you knew how you did it, but what do you advise them to do right now to get themselves ready for that opportunity?
I think that this is a profession of obsession. You have to be a little bit obsessed about the profession. You have to be obsessed about music. You have to be obsessed about sound per se. It's like other people might think that we are freaks, right? You are talking about, oh, that note, the bass, check it out. You're like, what are they talking about? You have to be that obsessed. You have to really be a fan of music too. You have to be a fan of music and be a fan of the artist creation without showing, that fan side, on the day-to-day work. But you have to be a fan, you have to be obsessed, and you have to be prepared. It's very simple. You have to know it all. You have to try to know it all. It's fair game to ask an assistant, how much do you know about this plugin or this platform or this workstation? And if they don't, you ask them. Don't come back till you really master it. I mean, that's the reality, because as I mentioned earlier too, they have to bring something to the table. They cannot be a distraction either. Your assistant has to really complement your work. And in order to complement your work, they have to know even more than you do about some of the technical aspects of some of the tools that you use in the studio. And I always tell the assistants, practice, practice, practice. You don't know what the DBX 160 does? Use it. Use it non-stop. Put it on everything. Put it on the vocal, put it on the bass, put it on the cello, put it on the guitar, put it on the kick drum, put it on the snare, put it on anything imaginable. And then you tell me, how do you feel? And they might come back like, oh my God, I just found out what it does on the kick. I never knew. Well, now you know. So, and that's what I actually did during my training years. I will see Glyn Johns doing something, and I'll go like, what? He's doing that? But in the middle of the session, you have a specific perception because you are hearing it blended with the music, right? So you are not 100% certain what's doing that. Maybe that's part of that sound of the kick, but it could be the room microphones, or it could be a combination of both. So you start dissecting things. At the end of the session, I'll go and solo everything. Go like, oh my God, that's what it's doing. Put it on bypass, right? Oh shit. Now I know what it does combined with the overheads. Now I know how it actually blends. Now I know that the snare sound, it's actually coming out of the overheads. Those type of things, and he's only using the direct sound to feed, mainly to get some of the snap and feed the reverb. I'm like, that's how it's done. So, but you have to dissect things and be willing to experiment, put the hours, and learn.
So let's talk about mixing. This is an area in which you, of course, are very accomplished and rewarded. What's the Rafa Sardina mixing strategy? What are you trying to achieve when you're presented with all these tracks and they say, hey, you, mix that?
The first thing I do is always, listen to whatever rough mix they might have of the music or of the track, and really evaluate in a very honest kind of way, what can I do for this music? What can I do for it? I mean, how can I really truly enhance it? And there have been even occasions, they are rare, but there have been a few occasions where you go like, damn, this is brilliant. What do I do to it, right? And then when you go deep into it and you dissect the whole mix and you start doing your own process and mixing, then you find out what you can actually do to improve some elements of it. But maybe your first reaction is like, wow, this is brilliant. I mean, like, they did it in a super, super brilliant way. So, but very often the first thing I do is really, musically speaking, I think in terms of as a producer. And I even think about the structure of the song. I think about the parts of the song where it could actually have a different kind of dynamic, even other than the one that they are already presenting to me. And that's part of my mixing process. It's not just making it sound beautiful or different. It's even about making suggestions to the producer and presenting them to him. Like stripping down a small section of the song and go like, and I think that's one element that every producer appreciates. They go like, they might like it or not. They call you because more often than not, you nail it and they really like it, what you propose, and that's part of mixing. So it's not just dealing with sounds, it's dealing with the arrangement of the song in a way. Even sometimes even flying things around in the song. Things that you detect that are missed opportunities for the song. Like maybe that guitar that they put in this second pre-chorus, oh my God, if only these two notes happen in the first one, that'll give you a hint of, it'll make it such a special moment. So you even do things like that. Obviously, they have to trust you. It must be people that really, really trust you one way or another. But I usually work with people that trust me, and they really appreciate that, So that, to me, that's part of mixing. Really digging deep into the production aspect of the song, not just the sonics of the song.
All right. Now, back in the days when you first started, most of your work was on 24 tracks. You had to manage the session kind of differently. Today, I'm sure you get projects that have, maybe over 100 tracks. How has your system evolved to deal with so many more elements?
I even have sessions that have even up to 400 tracks, which might sound crazy for movie sessions, things like that. But even for pop, regular pop, where they actually send you 150 tracks or 180 tracks just of vocals, things like that. I really separate things by instrument and arrangement in the song. So to me, I don't get surprised when I get like 48 tracks of a specific type of background vocals, things like that. I try to consider them as single instruments. Like, okay, what's this part doing? Is this main harmony that's doing that? This is the other counterpart that does this. So I really group them as single instruments. So I don't get like either overexcited or frustrated with those kind of things. And sometimes I even submix them into a stereo. I might rebalance it, I never rebalance without having my sonic approach to it. For example, if I have a set of 40 background vocals, I want to submix that to a stereo or to 3 different stereos with the different parts. I first nail how I want to make them sound, and then I rebalance internally, because how you make it sound in terms of the sonics and compression and whatnot is going to change the way you balance things out, and even the way you balance the different harmonies. It really affects, those low harmonies. It affects. So it's a big mistake when people just create a balance and then they try to process, and then everything becomes unbalanced again in your mix, and go, oh my God, that previous balance didn't work. Of course, it didn't work, because then you apply some sonic treatment that you feel is the best for the song, and now it's really messing up with your previous work. So I always, go for the sound, and then I rebalance things, and then I bounce things if necessary. So I deal with very few elements in front of me.
Let's go through some of the laundry list of treatment that people would apply in a mix. Yeah. Reverb. How do you approach reverb? What do you do with reverb? Do you ever use a reverb as an insert? Do you put how many different reverbs? One for the vocal, another one for the... What's your sort of reverb sensibility and your method? Yeah,
my reverb choices depend very much on the style of music. The style of music actually determines a lot of the kind of structure of the treatment I do with them. For example, on a vocal, on something that's very pop, I might have like 7 different reverbs on the vocal. I actually do have 7 different reverbs, but maybe one reverb is just creating brightness in the vocal. It's not truly a reverb per se. It's a very short, played, very bright, and it's just creating giving that brilliance to the vocal. So you don't have to EQ the vocal that much. Maybe another reverb is creating like a more of a early reflection space, so the vocals feel bigger than they are. But you don't really hear it as a reverb. You don't hear any tail to it. And then I might have other reverbs that actually have some tail, and I think that the secret to this, and then delays and whatnot, the secret to this is not just choosing the specific reverbs as you like them, but automating them. Because you might find a reverb that's perfect for the vocal, like really creates the mood that you are looking for, but then when this other part of the song happens and the artist singing like super staccato, it doesn't work at all. It creates like all of these kind of artifacts that are like really mess it up. So you automate those notes, either in the send or the return or both. And I usually automate the sends too, so I don't feed that note to the reverb. And now with Pro Tools Logic, you can automate those things very easily, even with the mouse, when it becomes like super specific, you can automate those. And many reverbs are actually meant to be even a tone, are actually contributing the tone, like what I was mentioning about the plate really creating the brilliance for the song. Maybe another reverb is giving the mid-range to the vocal without EQing the vocal, it's just complementing that. So when we talk about reverbs and delays, I'm not really thinking about effects per se. I'm thinking about tone very often. And very often I would even further process those reverbs and compress that reverb, and it creates a completely different wideness to the reverb. And how you use the panning on the reverbs, how you actually use a reverb specifically in this area of the mix, but you don't let it bleed to the rest of the mix. It's a semi-stereo kind of thing, only happens here with this instrument. So I think it's one of the most creative elements of any mix, the use of reverbs and delays.
And you touched a little bit on delays, but I want to give them their shine. How do you use delays, generally speaking?
Very similar to what I was talking about, the reverbs. To me, delays, even if they are very short, they also create a tone. They create a tone that you can really identify what it is. You don't really hear it as a delay, but you hear like something that's really affecting the tonality of the vocal, right? And then obviously delays are one of the elements that help you create depth, and even create those changes within the song. Like one part of a specific part of the song, the vocal is, you feel it here, but then on the next one you compress it even more, so it becomes like sort of like more in your face, but at the same time you add delays, so you create like, you sort of like stretch the vocal in that part of the song by combining different techniques, the compression plus the delay plus other reverbs that are a tiny bit longer or have a longer pre-delay, much longer pre-delay, and then happen later on. So you start stretching things out in the mix, and then they come back to normal for this other part of the song, and then you stretch them again. So you start creating more of a dimension to the mix. So the mix becomes more exciting and has more to say. It's not static, but it's more, it really speaks to you. Yeah, it has more expression.
Of course, compression is a very big part of mix. A lot of people don't even understand compression. You kind of just fiddle until you get it to sound right. How do you approach compression when you're mixing?
To me, compression, like the basic form of compression, can be achieved by automation. If we were to speak about compression, if you put the hours automating things, you could actually avoid compressing many things, right? But to me, compression is one of the basic forms of EQ. To me, compression is EQ. Many forms of compression are EQ. They actually affect the tone of the instrument, like in a major kind of way. Not slightly, but they can affect it in a major kind of way. Sometimes I don't start EQing an instrument until I approach it from in a different way through compression, and then I fine tune with EQ either pre-compression or post-compression. And the other thing that compression does to me very often changes the swing of the music, changes the bounce of the music. It's super, super basic to me. By playing with the attack and releases, you can change the way an instrument feels in the track. You can make it sound like more laid back, or you can make it sound like more. So those are, for me, the two main elements of compression. Use them as a form of EQ or tone balance, and the other one is changing, how it makes you feel, how it bounces in the music. And I use that a lot with vocals too. And when something is not feeling quite right, sometimes through compression, you can make that vocal appear to be more laid back in the track, just by doing that, working with the attack and the release.
And of course, that brings us to equalization, EQ. I mean, this is probably the most widely used and probably the best understood of all of these tools. Yes. How do you apply? What's your philosophy on using EQ in your mix?
Obviously, using EQ is one of the most basic things that you can do in a mix, and a lot of filtering, using a lot of hardcore filtering of some instruments, because they have a meaning in the mix that way, but a meaning that they wouldn't have on their own. If you, for example, filter a guitar part tremendously, if you play it by itself, it might sound awful to your ears, but it acquires some kind of meaning for the mix. So with EQ, to me, there are like two types of EQ. Those kind of creative EQs, creative use of the EQ like I'm talking about, and then there is the corrective kind of EQ. And even for that, you develop like an arsenal of different EQs that they do different things. And for example, in a guitar, I could use like 3 different EQs simultaneously. And the main reason is because one EQ does something like super special in the high end that a different EQ doesn't do. And another EQ is really, really good at just filtering things out without affecting the sound match. So you have an arsenal of memories of what different EQs can do for you in different ranges, not overall, but what a specific EQ does in the high end, in the mid range, in the low end, and you start like complementing those EQs together. So very often when I'm EQing something, I'm thinking about the final sound I have in my head, and I use different tools simultaneously. Saturation,
that's become something that also gives a lot of tonal character to tracks. And do you use a lot of saturation in your mixing?
Oh yeah, I'm a big fan of saturation, because we always use saturation. We use saturation when we're actually using different biases on analog tape. When we decided on a project back in the days, how we're going to approach a project, the first decision we will make as an engineer or as a producer will be, okay, we're going to record this +9. You will determine what kind of tape saturation, what tape calibration you will use, and it will create a different type of saturation. So, and then you also decided during the recording how hot you will be recording. And a combination of those two decisions will create a master with a very specific type of sound. So that was also part of the art of recording. And we had to know that. We had to really master that aspect of recording. So saturation has always been on my plate since the very, very beginning. And unfortunately, back then, we didn't have that many tools like we do today. We have so many brilliant options, these days, and very specific ones. The same thing I was talking about EQ, same thing applies here. Types of saturation that really work great in the low end, other types that work like really great in the mid range, and others, they do different things. So Yeah, I love saturation. I think that's it's actually a type of EQ too. I will consider it very often to be a type of EQ, where you're shaping the balance, the tone balance of the instrument.
As far as flow and placement in the signal chain, help the people who are watching this figure out your approach as to what goes on an insert, what's on a send, how do you bus stuff, what do you put on a master bus, what's your approach to where things go in that chain?
Yeah, it all depends on what your ultimate goal is with something. Very often I have, for example, EQ, pre-compression and post-compression. And there is a reason for it, because I want to actually create a different type of saturation through compression. Even through compression, you create saturation in a different frequency range for different parts of the song. Because maybe I want the vocal to sound ballsier in a specific part of the song, but then I want the vocal to sound more like constrained, and then I will actually, send a lot more high end to the compression so that high end gets compressed, and then I might actually even tame it with post compression EQ. But I want to create that effect. So very often when we make these decisions, they have to do with what do I really want to fit to what. If it is, for example, too much low end and is making the vocal become muddy, I might actually filter some of that mid-low and low end going into the compression. A tiny bit of it. I might actually shave it a little bit. And if I need it back, then I can be very precise in post-compression EQ and put a little bit of it back. So you have always to be thinking about shaping elements and how, what's really bothering you about the process. Because very often, and you learn by just experimenting, very often you try something and you love the sound. It's like, this is it. But there is one thing that really bothers you, or one thing that, oh God, but it's like really pumping in the low end and it's really distracting, or it's doing this, doing that. So you learn what you need to do to fix those problems. But I think that the brilliant thing about this is that most of the time you only learn by getting into trouble. And I suggest everybody be very, very, outrageous about what you do, get into trouble. Don't do things like in small doses. Just go for it. Be outrageous about some stuff, and you are gonna learn so much. The good, the bad, the ugly, but you are gonna learn so much. And even when it doesn't work, you usually learn something. You learn about achieving a new sound, and it might not be right for your song, but it's already in your database, and you go like, wow, when I encounter this, if I put this thing before the compressor, oh my God, it's gonna, maybe not for that song, but it's already in your database. And that's how
So be adventurous. Everybody listening, absolutely. Be adventurous, all right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, let's talk about acoustics and room correction, and how do you know what you're listening to? How do you know what your room is contributing? How do you know what's direct? I mean, you're making decisions. How important is good acoustic treatment in a control room when you're mixing?
I think it's super, super important. I mean, you're only as good as your ears, right? And your ears in the studio, in this case, are the speakers, and it's your room, your acoustic environment, where you're actually judging every single thing that you do. And you learn by experimenting, by working, mixing. When you go to mastering, it's very good to ask, where did I fail? What do you find out? Where is it not working? Oh, you have an excess of these frequencies. And also referencing, using to reference mixes that you like, your own and other people's mixes, things that you can really trust, that you like and know how they sound. And that's what I do every time I go to a new studio. First thing I do, I spend a good half an hour listening to music, calibrating the speakers, checking different options, what's going to work. even treating the room. There have been times where I asked to put like a blanket on the side of, because I could hear like a reflection, like a super weird reflection in my listening position. So those type of things, but you can only achieve that by having your collection of music that you can really trust, you know. And it doesn't have to be music even that, I have music that I just use for checking things out. Like, for example, I have a track that I can play to check how the super low end is working in the room. If it's correct, or if it's lacking, or if it's excessive. So I put like this specific track and okay, this is what's happening. I have another track that has actually way too much high end. It's at the edge of having too much end, but I know it. And when I play it, if there's even way much high end, I know that something is wrong. Or the other way around, if it sounds like balance, I go like, oh, something is wrong. This should sound like super bright. What's wrong with this listening environment? So, and I even do it in my own place. You know, you don't need to have any fear of referencing to other people. And actually, it can even be a form of inspiration. So I do it for inspiration, and I do it to really recognize where I stand with the project at hand, you know. And I jump from type of music to type of music, different types of music so often that it really helps me refresh myself to listen, constantly be listening to other music.
Now, the consumer today, the modern consumer, often listens to music with these things, earbuds. The video quality has maybe gone up 8 times. Audio hasn't really followed the sort of the video path. You spend so much time making perfect audio. How do you feel when we don't see the same kind of sort of growth in the way the audio is transmitted as we see the growth in the video?
It has been a little bit disheartening over the years. Having experienced that, you know, there were like some factors in the manufacturing industry, let's say in the consumer electronic industry, that over the years has been actually not been collaborating for better audio, because they were trying to be more like effective. They were basing it more on convenience, sales, you know, attracting the consumer in a different kind of way. So that aspect has been like super disheartening, you know, over the years. But I think that we're at a point where more people are putting an effort into better quality. You know, I mean, for the first time in the past 2 years, maybe, or 2.5 years, there have been different platforms, you know, advocating for higher quality audio, higher quality standards. And I think that over time, that's going to create, I don't know, like a more perceptive group of people in the in the bigger group of consumers that actually appreciate, you know, higher end audio and a better experience. I don't know, we can only hope that truly happens over the years, because higher audio quality actually gives you a higher emotional experience. It really does. There's nothing like feeling, you know, how that low end affects you, or that, you know, being able to recognize those production elements that have some sort of meaning, and it was a creation meant to do that, but now you are listening through a system that doesn't actually give you that. That's what I'm really talking about. So it all depends on the consumer, obviously, but manufacturers also have to be in the same page and be able to recognize that it can be of value to them to create better customers.
So we've seen a lot of interest and development actually in immersive audio or surround audio. How, as a mastering engineer, do you transition your mixes from stereo into that world?
I think that good immersive audio needs to have dedicated mixes, really. So I know that there are right now some projects are being approached from the STEM point of view, where they are actually working with stems in order to populate the immersive audio field But obviously, that's not the ultimate experience, right? The ultimate experience comes from really mixing for the format, truly mixing like the track for the format. But I think one of the biggest challenges that's happening with immersive audio is that when something gets mixed for immersive audio, down mixing it to other formats usually doesn't give you such a great result. You have to also start tweaking for the down mix formats. For example, you are going from an Atmos mix into 7.2 or 7.1, and then you are downsizing to a 5.1. Then you are down mixing it to a stereo. It actually doesn't translate that well. We're getting better at it, and I've been listening to a lot of these processes. So to me, they are like two different worlds, really: stereo and immersive audio, and they don't actually live together that well. They have to be approached differently. I mean, to have the ultimate experience and the ultimate mix. And when you do it one way or the other, when you feed like a stereo stems from a stereo mix into an Atmos mix, it's a halfway solution, to what a great mix should be. And the other way around too, when you are down mixing an Atmos mix you are trying to down mix it into a stereo mix, it again doesn't work perfectly. So there's still a lot of road that we have to travel from this point on. I think it's super exciting. It's such an experience to hear, like a surround immersive audio mix. Like, it's truly remarkable. But there is a lot of road to be traveled in terms of production, in terms of recognizing what kind of production value are you going to give to your clients, what kind of product you are creating.
When you're mixing, do you ever factor in the mastering engineer?
I do factor the master engineer, but only because I'm very lucky that most often I know what the people I like to work with do and what they can do for me, or what they can do for your music, or how little they are willing to do to the music in some ways. So I really factor it, but ultimately I try to deliver the most finished possible mix, the most finished mix possible. That's what I'm really looking for. And then I factor, the leveling thing and the final tiny little sign. I factor some of that. I'm not worried about those things because I know what they can do. But also often when the master engineer is somebody I don't really know, they might get like too adventurous and try things that are like really opposed to the vision of the mix. And I think that it is very important to have communication between the different professionals. It's very important to be able to call the master engineer and say, like, do you know what, in this mix maybe you can give me a tiny bit more low end, maybe I wasn't it's not close enough, a tiny bit more in these frequencies. I don't know, what's your perspective on this? And they might achieve it even not with EQ, but a combination of compression and EQ and different things. So that's their craft. But they at least need to know what you are looking for. And for example, there are projects where I simply tell the master engineer, don't make it brighter, please. Simply don't make it brighter. I'm not looking for that. Maybe if you want to give me some air, but don't make it brighter. It's opposed to what I'm looking for, or my client is looking for. So it's okay. It's good to give your master engineer some comments. And the other way around, your master engineer, it's okay for the master engineer to have a suggestion for the mix engineer and go like, if you deliver me this mix with a tiny bit less master compression or a tiny bit less low end in these frequencies, or so you can reevaluate your mix. Maybe your bass is way too boomy, or you might use a high pass filter on the bass, or things like that. So I really advocate for that, to have communication.
Rafa, you've worked with a lot of great artists, but I got to get a little soundbite from you about some of the more memorable ones. Alejandro Sanz.
Yeah, actually, he's an amazing artist, songwriter. One of the things that I really respect of him is, what a great songwriter he is. How he knows, how, his knowledge on how to craft a song. And it really helps with production. When you have somebody who can really craft a song and write the music for it, and his lyrics, how to, it's half of the job is already done, if not more, or 70% of the job is done. Because then anything you do in terms of production is so much easier, so much more enjoyable. You're not actually looking for solutions. You already have something extremely good. You're only looking for more greatness, to put a little bit more greatness into the equation, but you're not trying to fix something. So that's how I view Alejandro. He's an artist who is very artistic. Let's put it that way.
Diego Torres.
Yeah, Diego Torres, another guy who has such sensibility. And even as a performer, he knows what he can do with his resources. He truly knows. And again, he's super, super passionate. See, the kind of artists you are mentioning, they live the life of an artist. They really believe in the life of an artist. They conduct their lives that way. They really put everything on the table in order to create the best possible experience, for the listener. So, and they really care. Here's the thing. For example, one of the projects I did with Diego, he will be here in the studio, like really, really obsessed about even the things that I change. You see how we're talking about giving a different perspective proposal from the existing production, and you change things, and they wanted to know why. And he was adamant about being in the studio with me. And I really respect and appreciate that. I love it when artists say, I want to be with you in the studio. I want you to mix it, take your time, whatever, but I want to be with you when we do some changes or tweaks or further experiment with the mix. Because then you realize how committed they are to their craft. They are actually proving to you how committed they are and how sensitive they really are to things. I'm very, very suspicious when I'm working on a piece of music and everybody agrees with me. And I'll always say it. I'm super suspicious. I don't like it. I hate it. Because everybody feels different. Everybody even has different aesthetic to things. They hear different. They feel different. So the experience is not the same for two human beings. It's always different. They might have some kind of commonality, but it is different. So when somebody agrees to everything I do or everything I'm feeding them, I'm proposing, it really it really confuses me. But because I don't think, maybe they have a different level of conformity, with things and all that. But I really like people that challenge the process.
Luis Miguel.
Well, that's an artist I did so many projects with. Over the years, it accounted for almost 10, 11 releases with the greatest hits albums and whatnot. And it's an artist that was so demanding, but from everybody. But it was part of his search. Even if we were to go back to point zero, to the same point where we started, it at least allow us to experiment and do huge search of possibilities. And I really learned to do that with him, or to understand why it needs to be done. So when people ask me something that might sound outrageous in terms of, let's try this, I take it with a grain of salt and with understanding, because I know that people need to experiment on their own. Even if I have done it before and I have tried, and even if I have tried many times and failed doing it that way, I will still consider it, because the same way I was saying that there are not two people that feel the same, hear the same, go through the experience the same kind of way. That's also a factor that might allow that opportunity to be successful. Maybe this dude, he's proposing this, which I have already tried and never worked, but he knows something I don't know, or he's gonna give me something that nobody else has given me before, and maybe it works and it's brilliant. And it has happened to me a couple of times where I was very, it didn't sound like a good plan at all, and they proved me wrong. So that's why I try to be very open.
Symphonic Soweto.
Well, that was quite a challenging project because the different parts were recorded in many different places with different orchestras, different, the choir ensemble was recorded also in different, in different batches. So they sounded quite different, many collaborations, That was actually quite a challenging project, but I love to, oh my God, I really love to work on that project. And I even, with Angelique Kidjo, that work on one of the songs, or two of the songs, collaborate on several of the songs. She's such a phenomenal artist. I mean, I could be just working with her. I mean, she's so phenomenal. So yeah, that was actually a very enjoyable project because of all of those elements.
And our own Canadian Celine Dion.
Well, she's such a sweetheart. The first time I ever worked with Celine, I was an assistant, and it was with David Foster. We're talking about 90s, early 90s, mid 90s. She was super young, and I remember I worked on that song, and she's such a sweetheart. Over the years, I've done a few collaborations with her, but yeah, she's the ultimate artist. She really takes it seriously, and she has no problem telling you when she's not comfortable with something, or you might think that it is great, but she knows it could be better. So she has that, she's that demanding with herself.
You've won 17 Grammys, and there are more coming, I am sure. As you reflect back, the man from the Basque Country, how do you feel?
I feel, I'll tell you the truth. The way I feel is that I'm still on that road. I'm still trying to find where it leads. I really am. Because, I feel like in a way that all of this has just started. Like, I have so much more to say. I feel more prepared than ever to do great things. Let's put it that way. Before, it was more about learning along the way, finding out what I could do or not do, having the guts to jump into any situation. And when somebody asked me, "You want to produce this jazz big band album?" I was like, "Why are they calling me?" Or this great tenor wants me to produce his opera. Back in the day, I used to question, why they were calling me. What was the ultimate reason? I learned to just not second guess myself and just think it's all about intuition. It's all about trusting other people's intuition. When you are collaborating, working with somebody, the first thing that you need to respect is their intuition. And you go from there. All of the technical knowledge has to back that up, but the intuition is the most important element. You have to know you are leading in the right direction, that every single decision that you make is good for the music, is good for the artist, is good for the song. So I just feel that now I'm more prepared than ever in that sense, because I have all of the experience and all of the tools I acquire over the years, but also I have honed my intuition. I really, I don't bullshit myself about it. Let's put it that way. I don't bullshit myself about really feeling, having the right feeling about something. So yeah, that's how I feel about my career. And obviously, awards are good. They give you some kind of reassurance that you are doing things right, but they are not essential. Okay, they are not essential to anything. Even the charts. When you think like, okay, how many number ones, how many top tens, how many multi-platinum albums I've been part of, but ultimately, you put the same kind of effort and soul and energy and heart, even into the most low key indie projects you get involved with. It has nothing to do with budgets, notoriety, awards, any of that. So it's just the music. So once you say yes to a project, you are full on. You are full on. And which is another funny aspect when people ask me, how can we work with you, but we have to do it in an affordable kind of way. So here's what we propose. We are only going to take this amount of your time so that you give us, the right rate so we can actually make it work. And the reality it is that you cannot just half mix something or half produce something. You simply can't do it. And when you are mixing, you cannot just determine it's going to be a 3-hour mix. If it needs to be an 18-hour mix, it's going to be an 18-hour mix.
Yeah.
Regardless, so.
Mm-hmm. Now, you also do work with the Grammys themselves. Just tell us a little bit briefly about what are some of the things that you do for the Grammys and what are some of your roles?
Well, I've been the governor for the Grammys for about 10 years, and then I'm also a trustee for the Latin Grammys, and I'm also being involved as chairman of the LA chapter of the GRAMMY-winning, and and the CPI, which is the equivalent of the. I was the co-chair of the CPI, the Círculo de Productores e Ingenieros, the Latin version of the GRAMMY-winning. And I think that when I got involved with the Grammys, it was because for the first time ever when somebody explained to me what they truly do. Because up to that point, till let's say 11, 12 years ago, I didn't truly understand what they did. I was just thinking about the awards, right? That's what they do. They put a great show together. They award people, some trophies and, for their excellence in their career, and that's it, right? But then I understood that there is so much more to it, advocacy, how they advocate for the rights of creators, of songwriters, producers, artists in general. How they actually are trying to put education back in the school, music education back in the schools, and how they are supporting that. How they have music cares that helps artists, creators in need. When they go through a rough time in their careers and their lives, and they get support, either for substance abuse or just general things in life. They truly need to go to the dentist, but they are like bankrupt. They can't do it. And you'll be amazed how many people are in need. Now that we have gone through the pandemic, imagine the amount of people that couldn't make ends meet. So the Grammys are instrumental in all of this. They really are a support group for the creators in the industry. And they also help through the GRAMMY-winning and other platforms, help even the consumer industry have more awareness about the quality of audio, the quality of sound. So they are instrumental on those kind of meetings, pushing manufacturers to be more conscious and conform to some rules, to some standards that are going to be good for a better listening experience. So there are many different things that the Grammys do.
You also do some workshops, and I know you do some workshops in Spanish as well. Tell us a little bit about that part of Rafa Sardina.
Well, I started doing workshops because I really saw a need for hands-on experience exposure. Like, if I'm going to explain to somebody while we're talking about leakage in an orchestra or in a big band, what better way to do it than being in a room with a big band and demonstrating it to people and just moving those microphones and showing them the huge difference that it makes for the music. Or even tracking drums and teaching them to be more, showing them how to be more creative about drum miking and why you put the extra drum mics here and here and here and how you can use it for the different sections of the song. So that's actually production. It's not just engineering. It's engineering with a production mindset, which is what people need to be aware of. Engineering is not just capturing great sounds. It's also capturing the possibilities, right? When you go from the verse into the chorus and then the overheads, the drums open, how do you achieve that? Even from a recording standpoint, how do you actually record it so that you can use it in the mix in that manner? So that's why I became so interested on doing these workshops, because everything I was watching, or most of it, didn't touch on any of this. It was just about, get a great drum sound. This is what I do. And this is number one. I wanted to show that creative aspect of things, but then I also wanted to show them my acquired knowledge over the years about how other people do it. It might not even be my cup of tea to record this way, but I'm going to show you how it's done so you can really hear it, and it might be your cup of tea, or it might be great for the type of music that you create. Actually, in many of these workshops, I always have many artists / producers that attend these kind of workshops, because they are the most interested on that side of things.
So Rafa, thank you so much for your time today, and we had just such a great time talking about your life and your achievements. I personally could say that I consider you one of my friends, and you're just one of the most remarkable and successful people in our industry. Now, a lot of people watching this are young people. They're aspiring to get in the industry. They want to become engineers. They want to become producers. What last words of advice do you have for them? What do you say to them watching right now?
I think that in this industry and in this job, number one, you have to be passionate. You have to really recognize how passionate you are, and you have to persevere. You have to persevere so much. You have to be unafraid of making mistakes. You have to just be adventurous. You truly need to be adventurous. You have to think like, you really have to feel like you own it. That your art is the most important thing that the world has heard. You really have to be very self-encouraging. And I think that perseverance is everything. Because if you are good, you have perseverance, ultimately, sooner or later, you're going to make a dent in the industry, and people are going to know what you do, and you're going to have an opportunity. You're going to have a chance. So I think that's the best advice I could give people. Just be adventurous, know yourself, and persevere.
Thank you so much, man. Really, really appreciate it. Send my regards to all the people at the Peony Wing and the LA chapter. And I'm hoping to see you very soon when we get out to LA.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right. Wonderful.